It's a little hard to believe, but we've been putting out videos for over half a year now. And at this point, are our fundamentals still the same for the German longsword? Let's talk about that today. Zig-Zag Forte swordplay. So it's been a busy past few weeks and months, really. I got back from a tour in the UK a few weeks, maybe a month ago at this point, and then very quickly followed that up with getting involved in running Iron Gate Exhibition up here in the Boston area, our spring edition, which is all indoor and really focused on a high-level tournament. So yeah, it's been pretty busy. And all of that has kind of made me want to come back and actually really look again at, okay, you know, we go through kind of teaching a lot of sort of advanced techniques and then trying to take all that stuff and actually apply it in a competitive setting. All of that stuff, if we don't have the foundations right, if we don't have the fundamentals right, it's really hard to build on anything. So, you know, in doing these videos over the past 6 months, key question, has anything changed? And the answer is yes and no. I would say mostly no, mostly in the sense that, you know, a lot of the fundamentals that we shot at the very beginning, and I would encourage people to go back to the beginning of the channel. We had 4 videos on German longsword fundamentals. I encourage people to go back and kind of look at that just to sort of like validate what I'm saying. But really what we're going to do today is rehash what those things were. And it was a bit of a, you know, a funny way to start the channel, because on the one hand, I knew that I wanted to put out good fundamentals, but I also knew that, and it was really important to do that, obviously, to start with, like, what are we even assuming are the fundamentals for this weapon in the system. But at the same time, it's also the very first thing I'm shooting, which, you know, if you go back, I'm sure the production quality of those videos is hopefully not as good as we've managed to get to today, right? So instead of taking 4 videos in order to kind of get this stuff down, I really wanted to just do one solid video where all of this is all put together, and hopefully people can just very succinctly look at the fundamentals in one place and, you know, play through it as many times as you feel as you need. So for the fundamentals, you know, as I was kind of teaching this in the UK and several times, you know, elsewhere, I find myself repeating myself quite a bit, right? So, and I think that's a good sign. This is stuff that is pretty stable, repeatable, stuff that we use to build on for advanced stuff all the time. So let's be really specific on what are those fundamentals that I think are a really good starting point for anybody that is studying Johannes Lichtenauer, his art, the Kunst des Fechtens, the art of fencing, the art of fighting. And I do mean that whole tradition, which runs all the way from his original, you know, earliest documented versions of the so-called Zettel or epitome, his sort of secret poem, where he summarizes these mnemonics on how you would perform all of these various mechanics and tactics, which I think are all kind of tied in there. From that early state all the way towards the end of the tradition, which is sort of epitomized by, say, Paul Sector Meyer or Joachim Meyer in the mid-1500s, in that, you know, roughly 200-year span of documentation, while there's a lot of variety, I think there's a lot of sort of common fundamentals that are assumed pretty consistently by everybody. Not that there aren't variations, and not that these aren't things that are worth revisiting, because as we will see, what I documented at the very beginning, for instance, we're going to start with some cutting patterns. We started out with 3 cutting patterns: half cuts, full cuts, and running off. And we actually evolved along the way to adding a 4th pattern in the name of being comprehensive about how we approach this stuff. So, and that's another note, like today I'm going to focus less about sort of like broader theory and justifying that theory in terms of the sources. And I'm really just going to focus on just establishing stating what are the fundamentals. And then we'll probably go on to thinking about, okay, what are the implications? What are the bigger picture things of assuming that? And why are we assuming that stuff based on sources? Hopefully we'll do that in another video, maybe the next one, okay? So, all right, so fundamentals. I'm gonna break this up into two parts. One is what is basically like stuff to do with the hands and the blade. The other part is what to do with the feet. So starting with the hands, Joachim Meyer has a nice term for this, Handarbeiten, hand work, right? So things that we're doing with our hands, things that we're doing with the blade. So for fundamentals, while there is a broader world of stuff from above, cuts coming from above, attacks coming from above, in contrast to cuts and attacks coming from below, and even cuts and attacks coming from the side, we're going to focus just on things that are coming from above, okay? And again, these are fundamentals. We can always add to them. So the 4 cutting patterns are these, okay? So we have half cuts. We're always going to be cutting to long point, to and possibly through long point. These are half cuts, okay? And I'm alternating here, and I can always repeat on the same side. So these are sort of 2 modes. I can either alternate or I can repeat on a side. So here I'm repeating on the left, here I'm repeating on the right. Okay, so for default, I'm always going to alternate just so that people can see both sides. So those are half cuts. And actually, I'll do it from the side here. Half cuts. In contrast, when we talk full cuts, full cut, right? And this is where you can see this cutting X, where the center, again, is long point, right? So we're going to cut through long point, cut through the center. And the reason we're calling this a full cut is we're starting from the start of a cut, and by the end of that cut, that is one plane, right? So if we're thinking about cutting through a target, if we do something where we cut through and we deviate in that plane, odds are you're not going to cut through, right? So the idea is like this is one true full cut plane. So full cut, full cut, full cut, full cut. This is pattern number 2, as opposed to half cut. Okay, so again, really pay attention to this idea of the X. Now, so all of these different patterns basically trace various paths through this X. This next one, number 3, the Germans have a term for this, Ablauffen. In English, we can call this running off. And so it'll look like this. We cut here. When I'm cutting from my right, I'm actually going to then run off on the same side and then cut around to the other side. Run off same side, cut around. Okay, and so you get this sort of chevron or bracketed kind of pattern. And the important thing is, like, when I cut from one side, I do not cut through the center. I cut around the center, okay? And again, I can repeat this on the same side. If I do that, it's going to look like this. Run off and stay on the same side, right? So this is where I repeat running off on the same side versus running off on the other side. Ablaufen on the other side, okay? So that's 3 patterns. Let me do it quickly from the side so you can see as well. So I'm repeating it on my right here, repeating it on my left here, okay? And then if I want to alternate sides, that's what it looks like. Okay, it's pattern number 3. Pattern number 4, we're going to call this taking off. And the Germans gave this the name of Abnehmen. Abnehmen. So the reason that we're adding this pattern is because if you think about this cutting pattern, this cutting X, and I start every one of these from my right and I cut to long point, if you think about the different paths that this X traces, there's basically 4 paths that you can basically take, right? So from here, if I cut to center and I pull straight back, that's one path, that's a half cut. When I cut here and I go all the way through, that's a full cut. When I go here and I go down this branch of the X, that's running off. And so it occurred to me as we were doing our analysis that, hey, there's another path that's not being explored, and that is this: cut and then come up through that branch of the X. So this way we are covering all 4 ways that you can travel through the cutting X. And this idea of comprehensive analysis, this way of making sure that we're actually able to test every permutation of doing something becomes super, super important when we're thinking about interpretation and really trying to make sure that we are validating all the ways that you can actually explore using this weapon. And it is part of the insurance to make sure that we, as we look at interpretations, are not missing something in terms of options that we should be exploring, especially in instances where for a given interpretation, for you know, like data, things that are actually documented, it's something that they write down. Like if they are short on details, this is where it really becomes important to say, well, okay, what are the possibilities, right? And if we don't have all the actual possibilities fully figured out, then we may very well actually miss a option, which could be the one that they're actually talking about. So we'll go into this in greater detail, but this is really actually very important to be really comprehensive about all the different ways you can actually move the sword, because it really impacts the way that we actually analyze the system as well. So that 4th pattern then is, if I'm cutting from my right to long point, I'm going to come up the other diagonal upward, right? So it's here. And then from here, same thing. So this is what that looks like. So here up, other side, here up, other side. And so that's the alternating version. If I wanted to repeat on the same side, it's going to look like this: here, 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 here. That's on the right side. And on the left side, here, 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 here. Do it from the side so that you can see it. So I'm repeating on my right side. Okay, and then on my left. Okay, and then alternating. Okay, so that would be the so-called Ablauffen, or running off pattern. So those are the 4 patterns. And again, just for completeness, put it all together. So those 4 cutting patterns, the complete set, and I'm going to do this alternating so that you can see both sides. So half cuts. Okay. Then full cuts. Okay, running off. And then taking off. There you go. Okay. So hopefully that's comprehensive enough there for people who want to just get a big picture of it. And again, you can do those patterns to your heart's content as much as you want. Actually, we have another video out there where we do basically sort of a follow-along workout where we incorporate all of this stuff in there right up front. So I encourage people to go find that if you want to find good ways to actually practice this. But for pure definition, okay, so that covers basically all of the sort of key ways you can cut through that X when you're cutting from above using what they call the long edge. Here's long point, right? So my longest reach when I am cutting, that edge that I'm going to make contact with, that's my longest distance, that's my long edge, okay? Okay, so we've defined basically every way that you could possibly cut from above with the long edge. And by the way, as a little nuance, like, so you might wonder, okay, so if why diagonal, why not vertical, right? So if you think about it, like, even when I cut vertical, if I make these more and more vertical, at the end of the day, if I start cutting vertically, when I get here, I still, even if this is super, super narrow, super, super vertical, I still have a choice of, I'm required When I get down to here, I can't go through my body, right? Like this sword has to go somewhere. So at the end of the day, when I finish this, I still have to either go this way or I have to go this way, right? And so even vertical cuts, if you think about it, they still obey the X. It's just a super, super narrow X. So yeah, actually this is probably a really good opportunity. First, like, share, subscribe. Thanks very much. And if you want to comment, this is probably a good opportunity for you to put in comments if you can think of any other way that you can actually cut with the long edge from above that breaks one of these cutting patterns. But ideally, if we've done the logic correctly, those are the only ways you can actually transition in terms of doing a cut from above. Okay, footwork. So again, I mentioned that we're not going to go into sort of historical specific details on sort of justifying these things, but very lightly I will say, so here, fundamentals on how do we connect the footwork with the blade work, right? As a starting point for fundamentals, for default behavior. So when we cut from the right, when we attack from the right, when we throw a cut like this, what tends to happen when it's coming from the right, the torque, the turning will actually have this shoulder come forward, right? So rather than cutting here and having this shoulder forward, that's not what happens, right? So this is what naturally happens. And also, therefore, if we want to do something where everything is in alignment, you then also want sword, hand, shoulder, hip, foot, all lined up so that you really can end up in a position where you are longest distance, long point, right? What you want to avoid is do this and actually have the other foot forward, which has a number of things that are a problem with it. But the biggest one is, for the sake of consistency and for longest reach, you want something that really is giving you that longest reach and does not cut, does not get in the way of your sort of like ultimate power delivery, right? So if I'm rotating this way, by doing this, everything rotates together, right? Everything aligns so that you can actually do that full turn. If you actually step with this forward, what ends up happening is instead of your shoulders turning this way and your hips also turning in that same direction, you actually counter turn with your hips, right? And so what ends up happening is you're cutting short the amount of actually rotation potential that you have, right? So can we do that? Can we actually break that rule for other advanced things? 100%. We can definitely break that rule for later. But when we're talking about fundamentals and we're talking about default behavior, I think there is plenty of evidence in the system to suggest that what we want to do is we want good alignment so that, when, from a given side, we want all of that stuff aligned as much as we can. So again, sword, hand, shoulder, hips, foot, all of it aligned here, and then same thing on this side. Okay, so sword, hand, shoulder, hip, foot. Okay, so so there is that alignment idea of when I cut or I attack from my right, I want to line that also up with my right, right? So I'm going to land my attack and I'm going to land on this foot at the same time. So make sure that when you cut from your right, you step from your right. So that is a core thing from Lichtenauer's Settle. He says it in more specific sort of flowery ways, but that's basically the paraphrase. Cut from your right, make sure you step with your right. Cut from your left, make sure you step with your left, okay? So the other important corollary to that is when you, every time that you do throw an attack or a cut, try to make sure that you're taking a step. And that citation, which we'll go into in more detail later, that comes from sort of the other end of the spectrum of the history. Joachim Meyer, towards the end of the documented history, sort of indicates, like, as much as you can, you want to try to bring footwork to support every blade action that you can. Okay, so what that ends up meaning, again, cut from the right, step from the right, and then also one cut or one attack, one step. All right, so when we put this all together, so let's just use half cuts as our cut. And by the way, we can replace the half cuts with any of those 4 patterns, but now it's going to look like this. So instead of just standing in place with no footwork, we're actually going to coordinate it now here. So every time I step, I cut, and every time I cut, I step, and I'm trying to make sure that I step from the right, cut from the right, step from the right, cut from the left. Okay. Okay. And I can certainly rotate as I do it. And so you can see all I'm really doing, even if I do other cuts, doesn't really matter. The whole idea is to make sure that like we are coordinating the stepping with the cutting, and that we are doing it so we are not ending up twisted. We're not doing something where we go this way and then counter twist our hips against it for our default behavior. Okay. So with that coordination in mind, what I just demonstrated was, alternating cuts from side to side and making sure that I'm stepping with each one of those. And then we start getting into deeper nuances when it comes to pivoting. Actually, before I get into that, one other thing that I need to kind of flesh out. We focused on alternating attacks. Again, from earlier, we said that we can definitely repeat attacks on the same side. So for now, if I go through half cuts, full cuts, running off, and taking off, I'm going to do it on one side now. And if we're going to obey the rule of attack from one side and land on that same foot and keep that longest distance, what it means is that we want that foot forward every single time here. Okay. So here we go. So I'm going to do half cut, full cut, running off, taking off, half cut, full cut, running off, taking off, right? And notice I'm sort of minimizing it just to not give it away too much, but every time I want to land with my foot, when I land with that cut at long point, the sort of like key logic component to this is, if I'm going to keep doing this, if I don't want to be stuck and rooted to where I am, if I want to be able to keep distance with an opponent, it's not just this foot that I am transferring weight, putting weight onto it, taking it off, right? If I don't also do it with the other foot, the back foot, then I'm going to be rooted in place, and I don't want that. So what that really means is cut, step, cut, step, cut, prep, right? So really, as much as we want to cut and take one step, in instances where like we're going to repeat on the same side, it then becomes necessary actually to transfer weight onto that back leg. So now all of a sudden we are taking 2 steps for that one cut. But because there is no rotation that's happening, that generally is fast enough for it's okay to basically take those 2 steps rather than for one. So cut, step. So here we go. Half cuts, full cuts, running off, taking off. And by going with this convention, the other thing that happens very, very naturally and easily is the ability to move sideways by doing this. And again, something that is explicitly called out and defined by Joachim Meyer towards the end. But just because it's end of the tradition does not mean it is irrelevant to the earlier part of the tradition. I think it is very consistent. So here we go. Half, full, running off, taking off. Now let me start going sideways. So here we go. So half cut. So, so if we just kind of break it down to footwork, right? So I'm basically doing these steps. If I want to go this way, it is very natural for me to do this. And I can do this and actually circle, right? And then similarly, if I'm going to go the other direction, I can do this, and I simply go this way. Okay, so that is how to move sideways if we're going to keep the same facing. Some of the terminology that gets used is also if we're going to triangle, right? So especially when we go this way, you can see this triangle. This is what Meyer talks about when he uses the word triangle. So from here to here, right? That is a triangle. And then in fact, what he talks about as a double triangle is this, right? So there's this backward triangle, forward triangle, okay? So that is what happens when I'm trying to keep the same foot forward. The other thing over the course of this past, good part of a year is really starting to explore pivoting, right? So you'll notice that now if we go back to alternating sides, my shoulders really aren't pivoting that much, right? So I'm really doing more of a very square kind of cutting, which could be okay, but there's pros and cons to it. Like one of the bad things about it is that like my range is not as good, right? Like when I'm more square, I simply am not going to have quite as much range. And so there are times when you actually want to have more rotation with things when you're actually going from side to side. So what starts to get really, really interesting, and we've explored this in several different techniques over the past year, this idea of actually doing more than sort of like two-step phrases, right? So a lot of them sort of say modern Olympic fencing, a lot of arts really just keep a lead foot forward and just find ways to kind of use this in order to do all of the movement. There's plenty of evidence that we're doing things where we need to actually switch which shoulder is forward to the point where we really want to get profiled. And so rather than just doing these kind of very square switching sides, as soon as I start profiling, if I want to do this and I want to be able to profile and let's take the step with this left foot, all of a sudden it starts to lead into things. So watch this transition. I'm doing this pretty equal on both sides. As soon as I start profiling like this, I'm really pretty far away, and actually let me do it from the side. So here, as soon as I start to profile, this distance is good, this distance is terrible, right? Very short here, long here, very short here. So one of the ideas, especially once we start doing these things where we're trying to symmetrically do things on both sides, is more complicated footwork patterns, which are more than just two steps. So a key thing that we introduced over the past year was the idea of the box step, right? So rather than doing this thing where you're long here, short here, long here, short here, you can actually do stuff here. So notice, like from here, I'm very profiled. From here, very profiled. So here's the so-called box step, and you can tell it's a four-step, four-footfall pattern rather than two. And so what does that look like? So I'm going to go ahead and do this with all of the four different patterns. So half cuts, full cuts, running off. This is a really important one for running off, actually. And then taking off. Okay. And then on top of that, one of the really cool things about that pattern is, again, going sideways. So we'll keep it simple with half cuts. So once you start going sideways, you start getting into some really interesting things, which you can actually see in various illustrations in the historical sources. For instance, here we go. Let's see. So here's the box step. If I start going sideways, so these kinds of really twisted, almost like cross stance positions, they happen very naturally, simply by actually the act of moving sideways through this kind of box step. And then similarly, not symmetric if I go the other direction, actually. Here we go, we'll start here. So on the one hand, that other pattern, we would call, say, a grapevine, going this way, this kind of idea. Right, when I go the other way, it's a pattern which we could call a zigzag. And again, this actually fits right in with other things that we've seen illustrated. So that about wraps up what we talk about in terms of fundamentals. So there's the blade work, all the ways that you can cut from above using the long edge through the X, then tying the blade work together in terms of making sure that you're cutting from the same side as the foot that you're stepping on, and then also trying to making sure that every cut has one step that goes with it, and then then we talk about what happens when we sort of introduce the second dimension of moving sideways, when we're doing that both when we're starting on one side and staying on that same side, we're repeating or doubling our attacks on the same side. What does that look like? And then also when we are alternating sides and we actually want to get more profiled, then we start introducing things like the box step and starting to get into the world of more complicated footwork patterns, not just 2 steps, but 4 steps, and then allowing ourselves to actually get into some of these more complicated, sort of twisted body mechanics, which again, you don't see it that often, but you definitely see it documented in the various sources. And that is just one way that we should be exploring how to actually even get there and figure out, like, why would we even want to use that? So, so I think that's a good place to stop it for just a rehash of the fundamentals. Hopefully that is a easier bit of video to kind of get through than the 4 videos that I'd put together at the very beginning, all those months and months ago. So I think we'll call it there for where we're at today in terms of the German longsword fundamentals, blade work, footwork, and how to put together. I imagine that at some point we will probably revisit this again. One thing that I would love to add would be, okay, what are the fundamentals when we add in like Unterhau, like cuts and attacks from below, right? I think that's important and we want to get to that. But again, we can save that for later. I think this is plenty good for someone who wants to just start with understanding the basics of the system and like what are the things that they should start with. So I think that'll be it for today. And yeah, again, like, share, subscribe. Watch out for the next video. I think the next one will probably go into more depth on this, on a little bit more how to train it, a little bit more on variations and historical justification for all of these things. And see you next time.